We call this series Stories the Mountain Might Tell. And what we're gonna do today, this is a fun dinner. It's basically 600 years of the culinary history of our region. Our first course is going to be a sope. At its core are the three ingredients. They call them the three sisters. It's corn, squash, and beans. They grow together symbiotically. It's a great relationship. We've taken those three ingredients and have just tried everything with them. And so today we're gonna give you a sope. It has no dairy in it because that came with the Spaniards. And so this dish, we tried to take it back as pre-Hispanic as possible. And it's a simple dish. You eat it with your hands, but feel free to cut it if you would like. But it's traditionally eaten by hand. All right, you guys look good. And then we're gonna do a chicken paella, will be our second course. One of Spain's national dishes. It's one of my favorite dishes. We made it with chicken because before the Spanish came here, there were no chickens. You know, this would have been something that the Spanish would have made with their ingredients and the way that they did things. And of course, from paella was born Mexican rice and different infused rices that we use in this part, you know, of the world. And so it's a fun dish for me. I've been making it since, I don't know how long. You know, I've been cooking for over 35 years, and it's just one of my favorite dishes to have. So I hope you enjoy it. Third course is where the evolution part starts to come in. The dish is going to look like a Texas chili, but its origins are with Native Americans, and the fusion that happened between cultures gave us something completely new. Finding out about all the different history, and it's when I started putting it together, because I was doing an event for the elders, and one day I said, what were you guys eating before the Spanish came here? Give me something really, you know, pre-Hispanic. And the lady answered me in Spanish, and she said chile colorado, which is red chili. But because she said it to me in Spanish, it kind of short-circuited my brain because I said, that's Mexican. You know, I didn't say it out loud, thankfully. But it started something in my head, and I said, well, wait a minute. And then years later, we did another event for them, and they asked for chile colorado with rabbit. And so the original dish is a Native American dish, and it became Texas chili because when the Spanish came over, there was no cattle, there was no chickens, there was no pork. They brought all of that over. They brought over lamb. So all of the animals, farm animals that we have in this part of the world are because of mainly the Spanish explorers, and then, you know, obviously the French and well, all of Europe was here at one point. But this dish is kind of what evolved, and if you don't have these conversations, it's going to get lost in history, and we're never going to find out that the origin of this dish is Native American. But because the cowboys, you know, were born when the Spanish came, and they taught people how to ranch, and then chuck wagons became a thing. You know, the first food trucks were chuck wagons, and this is the type of food that they were eating: simple, hearty, and filling. And so this one is thickened up with some tortillas. Just chopped them up fine and let them in there, you know, boil and start to break down, and that's what gives us, you know, a little bit of thickness to this broth, a little more heartiness to it. And again, you have to remember, this is the way it was cooked in a chuck wagon. So, you know, you couldn't sit there and make a slurry and, you know, do all that stuff. You're just like, no, throw it all in there, you know. And this dish, when you're working with chilies like this, and you start to learn about other cuisines from around the world, working with chilies, it's really akin to working with curries. And so there's a line that somewhere was crossed, because in Mexican cuisine, the use of cumin is very popular, you know, and cumin is one of the main ingredients, one of the base ingredients in a lot of the curries that we get from India. And once you start seeing all the different spices that came this way, you know, you're going to taste a little bit of cinnamon in there, you know, you're going to taste a little bit of that comino in there, and the flavors just start to round out and get richer, and it's really not just a cowboy dish. You know, it really has so much more ingredients that are, you know, not from here, that were all sourced here. And so that's why I hate to use the word fusion in cuisine, because especially in this area, I think it's more about the evolution of food. And I say that Mexican food should be called mestizo food, because that's what we call Mexican people, mestizos. And the mestizaje of the people was the mixing of the Native Americans and the Spanish. And then I made reference to Creoles because it's the same idea, except it was more French, French Native Americans and the African Americans that were brought over, you know, against their will. And but we get this food that is just so amazing, and you know, there are silver linings, and the food to me is really the silver lining in all of this. So I hope you enjoy this dish. Again, it's served in these boats because my vendor didn't show up on time today. I'm sorry, but these dishes that you're eating on are actually made out of sugar cane. They're 100% biodegradable and compostable, and it is the idea behind this park. You know, we want to teach people about sustainability, you know, and I love, you know, I love working with them here. They're friends of mine, and it's a fun place to be. So I hope you're enjoying it so far. We got 3 more courses to go. All right, enjoy. Just a little bit, just a little bit. This, what you have in front of you, is mushu. If you go to any Chinese restaurant and you get mushu pork or mushu chicken, you're gonna get something like this, which is the stuffing, and you're gonna get a Mandarin pancake. They call them Chinese crepes. The first time we did this, Mateo, who's back there, gave me this recipe, and it's a 2,000-year-old recipe, and it was basically flour and warm water. And so I'm following the recipe, and we're gonna do this mushu wrap. And when I'm done with the recipe, I call him and I say, Mateo, I was like, this looks like a flour tortilla. And he was like, you know, he's like, I never really thought about it that way. But that night, my brain just kicked into overdrive, because flour tortillas had been discussed in the field as being Middle Eastern. But then I said, well, if they're Middle Eastern, Mexico City should be full of flour tortillas, because they have a very large Middle Eastern community, the Hermanos, as they call them in Mexico. And so I said, so they can't be that. And so when this recipe was given to me and I made it, I said, wait a minute. I was like, are you telling me that these are the flour tortillas that we now know and love? And so Juarez is known as the birthplace of the burrito. And they pride themselves in being the birthplace of the burrito. And so that got me thinking, in the northern states of Mexico, you'll get flour tortillas on the regular. California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, you'll get flour tortillas on the regular. Well, guess what they have in common? The railroad. And so the railroad, they traveled with the railroad, so they only moved as far as they were building. And what they were carrying were simple ingredients, because that's what they were eating. And so the original recipe, when I read about it, over 2,000 years old, it's what they used to feed the armies. They would heat up their tortillas on their shields. If you look at their shields, turn it over, it kind of looks like a wok. And so originally, there's a thing in this part of Mexico and Texas called a discada or a disco. And what it is you cook something, you cook some meat in this disc that looks a lot like a wok that originally used to be made out of train wheels. They were hammering them out and they were making these woks. Well, the wok eventually became the disco that Mexicans use for parties, and it's a very popular dish called discada. And so that was another Chinese influence on Mexican cuisine that kind of gets glossed over. And looking at this, you know, it's really simple to see how the burrito was born. And so the popularity of flour tortillas has 100% correlation with the Chinese that built the railroads. And in the region where the railroad was built is where you're going to find flour tortillas. The recipe has changed. You know, they started adding other ingredients and, you know, baking powder and things like that. So, but the original recipe was just something very simple that you can whip up in no time, and you can eat a very good meal with very simple ingredients again. And then the third part that's missing, that you'll taste it right now, there's something that's very popular in this part of the world called chiles toreados. And chiles toreados are usually jalapeños, sometimes serranos, and you fry them up, you get them to blister, and then you macerate them in soy sauce. And you go to any taqueria, you go to any Mexican restaurant, and they're going to have chiles toreados. You go to some fine dining restaurants in El Paso and ask for chiles toreados, and they will give you chiles toreados. It's a very popular thing. Guy Fieri rolled into town a couple of years ago. He didn't know about chiles toreados, and that was one of the takeaways from this visit, that he was just like, man, chiles toreados is like my new favorite thing. So he really enjoyed those. And when I ask people about chiles toreados, everybody's like, well, of course they're Mexican. You know, they're chiles, right? And then I say, well, where's the soy sauce come from? And that always stumps people, because then they're like, well, wait, so they're not Mexican? And I'm like, are they? Are they not? You know? And so basically the way I see, you know, life happening back in the 1880s, 1890s, when the railroads are getting built around this area, is, you know, you got farmers in the fields, you got workers, you know, on the railroad, and, you know, they started trading, and they started using the ingredients that they had near them, near their camps. And so chilies and things like that, and they started using their techniques. And then the Mexican side said, this is awesome, and we're going to take it and roll with it. And they took it over, and they gave us the burrito, and now we have all these different stuffings. And if you think about the California burrito, it's stuffed with rice, which is Chinese. And then you get the evolution. You add the beans, which are the Mexican, you know, side of things. Those two things together, you get the perfect protein. So nutrition-wise, you can feed your body and be healthy and have all the nutrients that you need. And then you have this handy-dandy vehicle where you can put your food and take it with you. And so, you know, this is fun for me, you know, that people will look at this and say, well, that's Mexican. But if you get someone who grew up in China, they may look at this and say, oh, that's a crepe, you know. But it is essentially the same ingredients. I did this with my wife. I went and I bought some mushu wraps at a Korean store, and I bought some flour tortillas, and I turned them over and I said, look, same ingredients. And my daughter didn't tell the difference. She, you know, to her, a quesadilla is a quesadilla. It didn't matter if it was a mushu wrap or a flour tortilla. There was no difference really in the texture or anything like that. So again, something that doesn't get talked about enough and kind of gets glossed over, but the Chinese definitely had a strong influence on the borders cuisine and the way, you know, things evolved. And Chinatown, well, El Paso used to have a Chinatown that was bigger than San Francisco's was, because this area before the big gold rush, this area was the hub. Like if you wanted fashion back in the late 1800s, this was the place to be. Later on it all moved to the West Coast or to the East Coast, but this was a very again, because the space where the position where we're at, you can look at a map and you can say we're in the middle of nowhere, or if you're like me, you're going to say no, you're in the middle of everything. And so that's why I love food so much. That's why I love this region so much, because it's so much more than just Mexican food and steaks and burgers. There's a ton more to this area, and this is what you're eating. So I hope you enjoy.
Thank you. You're gonna have a pita per plate. You're gonna have.
So this dish that we're doing now is kind of another evolution. It's a hummus, but it's made with edamame beans. And so again, right around the same time that the Chinese were getting here, the Middle Eastern families were getting here as well. And in my head, I didn't like garbanzos growing up. I like them now, but I didn't like them growing up. And so when hummus was introduced to me, I was like, okay, this is good. I liked it. And I said, well, I want to do something a little bit different. And so I just switched out the bean and put in edamame. And so we ended up getting something that's really unique to this area, because we had both of those cultures come together around the same time and again become an important part of the city's identity and the culinary aspect of it. And along with the foods, obviously came the spices. So the little spice that you'll find on top of that is satar. And satar has some sesame seeds, it's got some thyme. It's very fragrant, it's really good on something like this, really light. I like using it on fish, I like using it on a lot of stuff. Satar is really, really good. And so again, something that is not necessarily regional, but because all these cultures were here, you'll find satar just about anywhere. So it's fun going to the stores and finding these spices that normally you wouldn't think would be part of El Paso's history, Juarez history, but it actually is, because we have over 600 years of culinary history, and that's what we like showing on the plate. So I hope you enjoy this dish. It's a really nice dish, light. I love it. It's a good snack, and this will be kind of the palate cleanser before we head into dessert.
I was making these. I was like, man, I missed fucking.
Yeah, nice, nice. Dessert.
Give it 20 years. Just 12 courses.
Just six.
Oxygen level.
There we go.
There we go.
All right, so we're finally at the end of our culinary journey. What you have in front of you, depending on where you're from, you're going to say this is either a beignet, it could be a samosa, it could be a sopaipilla, which is what we know here in this region. To me, they're about the same. The first time I went to New Orleans, all my friends, all the people that I met at the restaurant were like, you gotta go to Café du Monde, you gotta go to Café du Monde. And so I go with my son and we go to Café du Monde. It was not busy when we went, oddly enough, because they say it's always busy. And so we didn't see any plates on the tables or anything. So we walked up, we ordered what we were supposed to order. And then when finally the food came to our table, my son and I looked at each other and we're like, Sopaipillas? Because there was a restaurant in El Paso called Pancho's that had a little flag on your table, and when you finished eating, you would raise your flag and they would bring you sopaipillas with honey. So here we eat them with honey. Up in northern New Mexico, they stuff them with savory stuffing, you know, meat and things like that. And so what I did here, I kind of again evolved it. The apples, obviously, apple pie is the inspiration there, and the cajeta. This is a made with goat's milk. It's a they call it burnt milk, but it's made out of goat's milk, and it's a caramel basically. And again, it's just evolving the food that we have in the region, the dishes that are in the region, and then just kind of putting them together in a way that makes sense. And so this growing up was dessert for me and my family, and so now it's done up a little bit more and it's dessert for you guys. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you guys so much for having me. And that's a wrap. We did 600 years of culinary history in 6 plates. Thank you guys for following. Remember to hit that like button, subscribe, and follow me on other social media. Peace.